It's time to enhance the relationship between expertise and impact, between knowledge and application. Welcome to a journey of discovery and empowerment. Welcome to All Physicians Lead, the Forbes Books podcast that highlights the critical leadership role that all practicing physicians take on every day. Here's Dr. Leon Morse.
Welcome back to my conversation with retired Major General Dr. Jonathan Woodson. Though he once dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, he ended up serving as president of the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Dr. Woodson, your resume is beyond impressive. I want to talk a bit about your tenure as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. What stands out as your greatest challenges and successes in that role?
So I always tell people somewhat jokingly that if I really knew what the job was like, I probably would not have taken it. But now looking back, it probably was the best job I'll ever have in many ways because of the challenges and the impact that one can have. But looking back in the era of 2010, remember we were at the height of two-theater war, and particularly with the numbers of casualties, the complexity of casualties. We had made some advances in saving lives, but now the issue was how do you make these individuals whole again and ensure that they have what they need to become to further their desires to be contributing citizens and integrate back into their families and their communities. So there was a whole host of complex issues related to wounded warrior care. In addition, of course, when I was hired by Secretary Gates, we were in the midst of somewhat of a budget crunch. The Balanced Budget Act was looming. The budget for the Defense Health Program ballooned from $19 billion in 2001 to $54 billion in 2010. And at that time, there were three separate medical services, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and there were some inefficiencies. So the mandate was really how to improve and develop more enterprise management. And for anybody who's worked in the Department of Defense, you know that not easy to get everybody to agree, particularly when the initial position or proposition is there are going to be winners and losers. Add to that the complexity of personnel changes. So during my tenure, I worked for four Secretaries of Defense: Bob Gates initially, Leon Panetta, Chuck Hagel, and Ash Carter, and four deputies, three sets of chiefs of staffs of the services and service secretaries, three chairmen, three sets of surgeon generals. And so there's that complexity of movement in space and time and personnel. And when you're trying to gain and maintain momentum for transformational change, it really becomes quite a challenge because every time one of the senior leaders gets appointed, they want to take a pause and restudy issues. So that's the environment basically. So what I did is I tried to have a clear and consistent message that was supported with data. And so my priorities over my tenure didn't change. They were always, there were six and articulated in various ways that resonated with the stakeholders. So the first was to modernize the management of the military health system with an enterprise focus. The second was to define, and deliver medical capabilities needed for the 21st century. The third was to balance and rationalize the military health system medical workforce. And the fourth was to invest in strategic partnerships, understanding that the complexity of healthcare required that we have strategic partnerships. The fifth was to overhaul and reform TRICARE. And the sixth was to expand our efforts and define our competencies in global health engagement. And so that was my consistent message, set of lines of effort and supported by data. And in engaging their various stakeholders, I would make these points, but in ways that resonated with whatever stakeholder group I was talking to.
It's quite a swath of lines of effort there. Made a ton of progress in that. Congratulations. It was interesting because you mentioned Mr. Panetta earlier, and one of the sites that I was commanding, a medical site, a clinic that some folks will be familiar with, had offices in this site for various high-level members of the department. And one of the offices was Mr. Panetta's office, should that site be necessary. And walking in, the first thing that struck me was, how we all have the chain of command photos, so you've got your brigade commander and your division commander and the corps commander and, on and on and on. There's like 14 photos when you walk into someone's office. But Mr. Panetta's desk had the chain of command, and it was just one photo of the president. Because he had a very short chain of command. But the funny story here and I won't talk a lot about me, but on the desk was a little notepad that said, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And I realized that was an incredibly powerful notepad because I could write something on it. Like, we need 10 more neurosurgeons and we need 2 MRI scanners, and just sign it Leon.
Oh, yes.
And hand it to somebody, because the Secretary of Defense and I shared the same first name. And I thought, I wonder if I could get away with that just a couple times. And it didn't have the guts to try it. Probably a wise move for a colonel
to use the tools available to you.
Not try that ruse. But it still strikes me as it was pretty funny to see his single photograph of his entire chain of command. So in all these leadership roles, undoubtedly have learned a lot. Our listeners are interested in leadership. That's the whole point of this podcast. Any significant philosophy, guiding principles, words of wisdom that you've learned, things that you've stuck with? I know you've touched on a number of them, keeping a broad, open mind about opportunities and, incrementally, iteratively growing your capabilities. Other things that you'd say to young and mid-career folks, these are the things that would help?
Yeah, no, there are, I think, a lot of lessons I've learned that have been codified by a number of authors in various ways. I think the first is this concept of emotional intelligence. You've got to know yourself, be very self-aware, be empathetic, self-regulate, develop those social skills to connect with people, because really that's how you influence and get people moving in the direction in which is important to the organization. One of the issues in leadership is you really got to be reflective about asking what needs to be done. I mean, really to move the organization ahead or pivot the organization so that it's relevant for the future. So it's not what's right for me or right for a subgroup. It's about what's right for the enterprise, and keeping that forefront, and understanding that as we mentioned before, the world is changing. So the key is about positioning, making sure the organization is positioned to be relevant to the future, and focus on the opportunities, sort of rather than the problem. So this is the issue of being optimistic. I think a leader needs to be an optimistic person in order to inspire people to want to be part of and attack these very complicated issues. You've got to know your own personal experiences and be able to dissect out what biases you have. So we were talking about before our chosen medical specialty and the like. When you take on these larger jobs, you've got to actually let go of some of those parochial concerns, because you're actually representing and leading an organization that has a wider set of responsibilities and importance. And it's not about a subset. It's about ensuring that every aspect of the organization is supported so that you can meet mission today and in the future. So that's extraordinarily important. You've got to know what your values are as a leader. This is something that young people have got to iteratively reflect on, because your values are what act as your compass. There are a lot of murky situations that organizations and leaders can get into. And if you don't have a strong sense of your values to guide you in terms of what's right and wrong, you certainly will err. And there may be some difficulty. So you've got to iteratively reflect on and mature and develop a deeper sense of what your values, because that's what really is going to motivate you and ensure that you're on track to making the right decisions. So those are, some of the things that I've thought about and learned over different leadership experience. Of course, there are many, many more, but those would be some of the key things I would want young people who are developing themselves as leaders really to understand.
That's a foundational set. Thank you for sharing that. You've served as a professor of management, so not a lot of doctors have that type of title experience. How does that inform healthcare leaders? The whole management side of things is clearly important, but we have management professionals, and shouldn't they be managing that? And second question within that, is there some modicum of finance, policy, healthcare insurance knowledge that physicians in training, in particular nurses in training, and then junior clinicians should know? Where do you think that balance is? The curriculum is already very crammed, but shouldn't we know something about the business of medicine? If so, when and how much?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, this is about the intersection of, as I said before, of health, medicine, and society. If you don't appreciate the complexity of the economics of the health system, you may find yourself beating your head against a wall, trying to understand why the system doesn't move, and it may be because of complicated reimbursement and reward systems that we have. And if you don't understand that, you don't know which levers you can try and influence in order to make progress. So young professionals who want to assume leadership positions in healthcare or many organizations have to understand some basics of finance. Now, as you said, there are people who are experts in that area, but you have to be able to ask questions. And you have to challenge individuals about why, in fact, we can't make change in where we can, in fact, innovate to make improvements. So I taught health sector leadership when I was at the BU and part of the business school and ran some courses. It was very important in that course to have as part of the curriculum information for the students to understand these other sets of issues that impacted healthcare, because that was the only way they could understand their roles and responsibilities in their organizations and how they could be supportive of change or lead to change. So it's very important for physicians in particular, but healthcare professionals in general, particularly if they come from a clinical background, to understand these other interdependencies that exist.
Yeah, it allows you to sort of keep your sanity, as you suggested. If you're trying to acquire a new operating room microscope and all you're doing is tearing your hair out, you're not going to have a lot of hair left after a few months. All of us remember where we were on 9/11. Following that, you served as a senior medical officer in the response to that. How did that impact you? What did you take away from that, and stories you can share?
Yeah, sure. So I think all Americans know where they were. For me, I had been in the operating room early in the morning, done a carotid endarterectomy, when shortly thereafter we saw the first plane fly into the World Trade Towers in New York. Then subsequently, the second plane. So we knew that this was not an isolated accident. At that time, I had, in addition to sort of reserve responsibilities, had taken on some responsibilities to work with FEMA and the disaster medical assistance teams as a senior medical officer. trauma specialist. I knew that this was about a homeland attack. And then shortly after that, my people went off and said, we need the teams to go to New York. We got our gear together, rallied, and then we made our way down to New York. And that was just an incredible experience. I can remember rolling into New York, and the city was just stunned. Now, this is a city I grew up, and the city was just stunned. I remember individuals just standing around along Lexington as we went down toward Ground Zero. I got to Ground Zero, and it was this incredible apocalyptic scene. The area of the towers was still really burning. We eventually set up in a community college that was nearby, but in trying to find sites that were appropriate for setting up medical operations, we looked in a variety of places, and one of which was a high school, a special science high school. I had been there because I had applied to this science high school when I was a high school student, and walked in there, and it was one of these older schools in which they had these sort of stone staircases, and there was about 2 inches of dust on the floor, and the lights were out, and there were these piles of medical supplies that folks had brought from the hospitals down there. So it was an unbelievable scene. One of the issues is that no one knew where we were going as a country in terms of the magnitude of this problem. And so this gets back, basic leadership. You need to organize in order to take care of immediate problems. You've got to inspire people to commit to the mission, even when you don't know what the outcome of things are. At that time, there was just a lot of organizational issues relative to military coming in, local resources. And so all of that needed to be finessed in terms of who was doing what when. The issue was also thinking about the long haul. So we didn't know where this was going, basically. So we had to think about what subsequent phases would be if indeed there were additional attacks or other issues that would come up. So we learned a lot through that.
Yeah, I remember we had rescue and recovery teams launch from Walter Reed. Of course, the Pentagon was just down the street. So the roads were empty, and we'd get on a bus, and there were police escorts, military police escorts in front and behind the bus with the lights flashing. And, I had one particular shift from midnight to 6 and go down, and all of the huge lights, construction lights, illuminating the gash in the side of the building, and this huge heavy machinery lifting pieces of debris out to try to find survivors or recover remains. And every time something was found that was even remotely human, the signal would go out and everything would stop. All the heavy equipment stopped. Everybody focused on this. At that time, a day or two in, it was, a leg, or as the medical officer on site had to examine and say, this is not survivable, and then treat with the appropriate respect, then package for the medical examiner teams. And then once that process was done, all the heavy equipment would fire up. But when it quieted down every time that happened, and everybody just stood watching, hoping that something positive was going to come out of one of those moments. And there were certainly a few, but fewer than we would have liked. Never forget.
Never forget. Exactly.
Never forget that. So looking forward, when you look at future challenges, we obviously touched on a few through here, how, as Yogi Berra said, I believe, predicting is hard, especially about the future, right? As you look in your current role and in other leadership roles you will probably achieve and attain, service to the nation, to humanity, to patients, and to providers, what are the biggest challenges in the next 5 to 10 years that that we're looking at and should try to prepare our minds for, as you've suggested?
Well, again, I hate to keep returning to this concept of volatile and uncertain, but if you read the morning papers, in digital form or whatever form you get your news today, you know that the world is really on fire. We've got issues in Eastern Europe that threaten really all of Europe. We've got issues in the Indo-Pacific. We've got issues in the Middle East. And so these, predict challenging times ahead in which we've got to grow good leadership in order to ensure that we are prepared and do the right things as a nation and globally. So that points up a couple of things for us. We've got to step up constantly our game to create the mindset and skill set that particularly the military needs in its future leaders. And there are several things that they need to acquire. They need to acquire the ability to anticipate change, to understand how to read the winds, if you will, so that they can position organizations to be relevant for the future. They've got to understand the drivers of change and be able to build those teams that can develop the menu of solutions. Understand, again, the interdependency of issues, as they develop solutions that they're going to offer to senior leaders. And then understand that although the world is volatile and uncertain, it doesn't mean that it's not predictable in some ways. There are some issues about human nature, about government, that can help us support the development of clear solutions going forward. And then, as I mentioned before, in developing plans to address complex issues, be able to develop lines of efforts in which you have on and off ramps so you can course correct. That's extraordinarily important. I think the last thing, I would have young people reflect on is this issue of things change. So whatever level they might be leading at, understand that you've got to evaluate the momentum for change, because otherwise you could be in a position of doing things right, but not doing the right thing, which means that according to anachronistic policies and laws, it may restrict you from employing certain treatments, organizational design, or whatever it might be. But because the environment has changed, you have got to, as a leader, make others understand when policies and laws and statutes should change so that you can do the right thing. And we faced this when we were the ASD because there were new treatments coming on board that TRICARE wouldn't allow, as an example. And we had to persistently go to Congress and say, we need to update this defined benefit in order to do the right thing for patients, even though by the outdated policies, we were doing things right, but certainly not what the patients required or desired. That's another message that I would deliver to young leaders, is constantly evaluate whether or not you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, be curious, as Ted Lasso would say, right? Be curious. Is there a better way to do this? Dr. Jonathan Woodson, thank you on behalf of all the All Physicians Lead listeners for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to be with us today. Your insights, thank you for your sharing your experiences, and of course, thank you for your service to our nation and humanity for so many years and ongoing. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having me as a guest, and for your leadership, Leon, and your service to the nation as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, sir. And that concludes this episode of All Physicians Lead. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe so you receive notifications when new episodes are released. Leaving a review also helps other interested listeners discover the program. I appreciate you taking the time to listen in and look forward to your company on the next episode.
This has been All Physicians Lead. We can all be better leaders, and our teammates and patients will be the beneficiaries. Go to allphysicianslead.com to unlock your potential, sharpen your impact, and elevate your journey. All Physicians Lead with Dr. Leon Morse is a production of Forbes Books.